Hello, welcome to Deadliest Disasters, where we cover some of the most devastating events that happened throughout history. Imagine a disaster so massive that it changed the course of history. A catastrophe that took millions of lives, reshaped landscapes, and left a nation struggling to recover. This is a story of the 1931 floods in China, known as the Yangtze Huai River floods, one of the deadliest natural disasters ever recorded. To understand the magnitude of the 1931 floods, we first need to look at the geography of China. The country is home to some of the world's largest and most powerful rivers, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, and the Huai River. These rivers are the lifelines of China, but they can also be incredibly destructive. The Yangtze is the longest river in Eurasia and the third longest river in the world. The Yellow River is the sixth longest river system on Earth. So what exactly happened? In 1931, central China experienced a perfect storm of conditions that led to unprecedented flooding across the region. Three of China's major rivers, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, and the Huai River, all flooded simultaneously. But this wasn't just any ordinary flood. The scale was almost unimaginable. At its peak, water covered about 52,000 square miles of land. That's like submerging the entire state of Louisiana. The death toll estimates range from 1 million to 4 million people. Even at the lower estimate, that's more than died in the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, Hurricane Katrina, and the Haiti earthquake combined. A field survey by the University of Nanking, led by John Lossing Buck, immediately after the flood found 150,000 people had drowned. That is the number represented less than a quarter of all fatalities during the first 100 days of the flood. The National Flood Relief Commission found that 2 million people died during the flood, having drowned or died from lack of food. A cholera epidemic in the subsequent year, from May 1932, was officially reported to have 31,974 deaths and 100,600 cases. This was due to drinking water becoming contaminated, and the moist conditions were the perfect host for the spread of bacteria. So what caused flooding of this magnitude? Well, it was essentially a perfect storm of natural and human factors. From 1928 to 1930, China was afflicted by a long drought. The subsequent winter of 1930 to 1931 was particularly harsh, creating large deposits of snow and ice in mountainous areas. In early 1931, melting snow and ice flowed downstream and arrived in the middle course of the Yangtze during a period of heavy spring rain. Ordinarily, the region experienced 3 periods of high water during the spring, summer, and fall, respectively. However, in early 1931, there was a single continuous deluge. By June, those living in low areas had already been forced to abandon their homes. The summer was also characterized by extreme cyclonic activity. In July of that year alone, 9 cyclones hit the region, which was significantly above the average of 2 per year. 4 weather stations along the Yangtze River reported rain totaling over 600 millimeters, that's 24 inches, for the month. The water flowing through the Yangtze reached its highest level since record keeping began in the mid-19th century. That autumn, further heavy rain added to the problem, and some rivers did not return to their normal courses until November. But nature wasn't the only culprit. Human activity had set the stage for disaster. Decades of deforestation had removed natural barriers that would normally absorb rainfall and slow water flow. Farmers had been clearing forests to make way for agriculture, not realizing they were removing a crucial flood defense. And China's complex network of dikes and levees, some dating back centuries, had been poorly maintained. Many failed when the waters rose. The immediate impact was catastrophic. Entire cities disappeared underwater. Wuhan, a major industrial center, was submerged under up to 16 feet of water for nearly 3 months. About 15% of the country's wheat and rice crops were destroyed, leading to widespread famine. This was particularly devastating as it happened during the Great Depression when China's economy was already struggling. Disease followed the floods. Stagnant water became breeding grounds for mosquitoes, leading to malaria outbreaks. Typhoid and dysentery spread through contaminated water supplies. In many cases, these diseases killed more people than the initial flooding. The human stories are heartbreaking. Families were separated as they fled to higher ground. Many people spent months living on makeshift rafts with no access to clean water or medical care. Others climbed to rooftops or hills, only to become stranded as waters rose around them. At the time, the government estimated that 25 million people had been affected by the flood. Historians since have suggested that the true number may have been as many as 53 million. As well as inundating rural areas, the flood caused widespread destruction to a number of cities. Refugees had been arriving in the city of Wuhan since the late spring, when the city itself was inundated in the early summer and after a catastrophic dike failure at just before 6 a.m. on the 27th of July, around 782,000 urban citizens and rural refugees were left homeless. The flood covered an area of 83 square kilometers, or 32 square miles, and the city was flooded under many feet of water for close to 3 months. Large numbers gathered on flood islands throughout the city, with 30,000 sheltering on a railway embankment in central Hankou. With little food and a complete breakdown in sanitation, thousands soon began to succumb to diseases. Jin Shailong, senior engineer at the Huai Flood Prevention Agency, stated, "There was no warning, only a sudden great wall of water. Most of Wuhan's buildings in those days were only 1 story high, and for many people there was no escape. They died by the tens of thousands. I was just coming off duty at the company's main office, a fairly new 3-story building near the center of town, when I heard the terrible noise and I saw the wall of water coming. I raced to the top story of the building. I was in one of the tallest and strongest buildings left standing. At that time, no one knew whether the water would subside or rise even higher." The city of Nanjing, the capital of the Republican China at the time, was also severely affected by the disaster. One of the most disastrous single events during the flood occurred on the 25th of August 1931, when the water rushing through the Grand Canal washed away dikes near Guayu Lake. In Guayu County alone, 18,000 people drowned and 58,000 died due to famine and diseases the following year. International aid did arrive, but it was insufficient for a disaster of this scale. The Chinese Red Cross and the foreign missionaries provided what help they could, but they were overwhelmed by the magnitude of the crisis. The long-term impact of the floods extended far beyond 1931. Agricultural land was damaged by silt and contamination, affected harvest for years afterwards. Many farmers lost their land entirely, leading to significant population migrations. The economic impact was devastating. Already suffering from the Great Depression, China's economy was further crippled by the destruction of infrastructure and industry. Rebuilding took decades. Some historians argue that the floods contributed to the political instability that would later help the Communist Party rise to power. The nationalist government's inability to effectively respond to the disaster undermined their legitimacy in the eyes of many Chinese citizens. Today, China has invested heavily in flood control infrastructure, particularly the massive Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River. While controversial for its environmental and social impacts, the dam has helped prevent floods of the magnitude seen in 1931. Climate scientists warn, however, that as global warming intensifies, extreme weather events like those that triggered the 1931 floods may become more common. The lessons from this disaster remain relevant as we face an era of climate uncertainty. The 1931 China floods represent one of history's deadliest natural disasters, yet they remain surprisingly unknown in much of the world. Perhaps this is because they occurred during a turbulent period in Chinese history, or because Western-centric history often overlooks catastrophes in other parts of the world. But understanding disasters like this one is crucial. They remind us of our vulnerability to nature's forces and the importance of sustainable environmental practices. They show us how political instability can magnify the impact of natural disasters, and they demonstrate both the terrible suffering humans can endure and the resilience with which communities can rebuild. Thanks for watching today's video on this devastating but important historical event. If you found this informative, please hit that like button and subscribe for more historical deep dives. And let me know in the comments what other overlooked historical events you'd like to learn about. Until next time, this has been Deadliest Disasters.